I am live streaming this from a hotel room. Um, at some point, we're in episode 9. I wasn't aware I read that. I literally cannot remember. I don't know. This is a rather lengthy chapter episode. And yeah, I'm definitely not going to be able to get through it all because I do have to get some sleep and fly back home early in the morning. So, hopefully hold on. All message visible. All right. So hopefully this is working. Hopefully it is recording. There's no way for me to confirm at all this time. So excuse me as I just double check. Okay. Okay. I'm just gonna have to see what's going. So episode 9, Hartman. Sam brushed away the snow that was clinging to his goggles and checked his location on the map on his device. If he ascended the slope, then he should be able to see Hartman's research facility. It was 7 days since Sam had departed Mountain Knot City. He had already surmounted 2 peaks, crossed the crevice, and climbed and descended more slopes than he could count. The weather had been relatively stable, but the skies were beginning to turn a little more ominous now, and it looked like a blizzard was on its way. Sam wanted to get to Hartman's place before it arrived. He couldn't risk losing cargo this precious. It was irreplaceable. It was something that Sam struggled to class as cargo at all. It was Mama's body wrapped tightly in a body bag. After dying together with her unborn baby, Mama's Ka had become connected to her Ha through the Ka of her child. It was likely because of that she was able to move her body as if she was still alive. Even after the umbilical cord that connected them had been cut, Mama's body neither necrotized nor decomposed. In fact, it had remained in the same state as when she had just died. Such an unusual phenomenon had piqued Hartman's interest, and he had requested to examine the body. He thought it might provide a vital clue to understanding the relationship between the Ha and the Ka, and that between the worlds of the living and the dead that the beach connected, and between the worlds of the living and the dead that the beach connected. If Sam was lucky, it might even offer some insights as to why Sam was the way he was, too. That's why it was so important to get Mama's body to Hartman. The long march to his lab felt like her funeral procession. After circumventing the large rocks that began to protrude halfway up the slope, Sam's view suddenly expanded. He could see to the bottom of the basin and the frozen lake that lay there. It was hard to make out amid the snow flurries, but it seemed to be shaped like a heart, like a simple heart that had been doodled by a child. Hartman resided alongside it. As Sam reached the lab, the sensor scanned Sam and opened the entrance. The delivery terminal that was set up next to it automatically booted up, welcoming Sam to the facility. He was about to announce his arrival when he was greeted by a mechanical sound. "Please proceed." The door opened, and Sam proceeded into a long corridor that was flooded with light. In contrast to Mama's lab, Hartman's lab was immaculate. There wasn't so much as a speck of dust in sight, but no signs of life either. The hallway was almost silent. The sound of Sam's footsteps and breathing were the only noises echoing faintly between the walls, which felt kind of cushioned and springy, just like the floors. "Please enter." Encouraged onward by the voice, Sam passed through the automatic doors. Suddenly, the hallway was cloaked in darkness. Sam couldn't make out what was in front of him, but luckily there was a handrail to grab onto nearby. Sam gripped it and waited for his eyes to become accustomed to the blackness. Music was playing faintly in the distance. It was a heavy and melancholic piano piece. It was Chopin's funeral march. The moment Sam turned in the direction of the source of the music, something caught in his throat. Something that couldn't possibly be there was floating in front of him. A BT. Sam reflexively held his breath and stopped moving. Perhaps this was why he hadn't sensed any sign of human life in the lab. Maybe something had happened to turn this place into BT territory. But there was no response from the deck. Deadman had assured Sam that the functionality of the reset BB had been restored. But maybe Sam had messed up when he was tuning the BB with himself. What if it was still too soon after the BB's memory had been wiped? On the way here from Mountain Knot City, they hadn't had to go through any BT territory, so Sam hadn't noticed that the BB wasn't responsive. But now he realized that he hadn't been able to reconnect with Lou at all. Deadman's face flashed before Sam's eyes. He could feel the anger billowing up as he imagined punching the liar square in the jaw. Then Lou let out a laugh. As Sam peered down into the pod, Lou gazed back up. Lou seemed to be trying to tell him something. Sam looked back toward the BT. He could have kicked himself. It was a dummy. Sam flicked it with his finger and carried on forward, led by the unending music. Someone was lying face up on a padded lounge chair ahead in the darkness. The sleeping face beneath the glasses was that of Hartman, who Sam had talked to over codec a few times now. "Hartman," Sam whispered. The man didn't look like he was sleeping. His chest wasn't rising or falling at all. He wasn't breathing. Sam had a bad feeling about this. This was why there had been no sign of life. He supposed the piece of equipment beside the chair was there to monitor Hartman's vitals. It was similar to one of the machines in Bridget's room. It was most likely an EKG. The EKG reading should have depicted a wave, but it wasn't oscillating a jot. It was flatlining. Hartman's heart had stopped. "Hartman?" The music stopped. It felt like someone's funeral had just come to an end. Lou was staring at Hartman with a strange expression. The deck was still unresponsive. Then the small device on the left side of Hartman's chest let out an electronic noise. "Administering shock. Stand clear." Immediately afterward, the body shook. With an electronic beep, the EKG graph began to draw waves. Then the man drew a deep breath and sat up, and looked at Sam with the face of someone who was still slightly groggy, with tears in his eyes. Sam still hadn't grasped what was going on when Hartman stood up and wiped the tears away. He adjusted his glasses and offered his hand to Sam. Seemingly unperturbed by an unresponsive Sam, the man began to speak. "Well, you certainly caught me with my pants down." "Glad you could make it, Sam. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to alarm you, but I am what I am." Sam just stood there, not knowing what Hartman was talking about or how he should reply. Please lay her down there," Hartman instructed. He seemed to think that the reason Sam was so confused was because he didn't know what to do with Mama, and indicated toward a stretcher next to his lounge chair. "Still no sign of them," Hartman muttered to himself, not paying Sam any mind as Sam laid the body back down. Hartman was skillfully fiddling with his cufflink. "You know your heart stops beating," Sam said in an attempt to get Hartman to turn around. "Don't worry about it," Hartman replied, pointing at the device on his chest. "It stops every 21 minutes. I spend 3 minutes on the beach and then return." His voice was as casual as if he was describing his day. 60 deaths and 60 resurrections per day. 60 opportunities to search the beach for my departed family. This is how I live. This is my life," he explained. Sam was becoming increasingly confused, but Hartman was paying no attention and continued to fiddle with his device. On a small table beside the chair stood a small hourglass, but for some reason, no sand was falling from the top compartment. Old books, images, and music neatly lined the ceiling high. Old books, images, and music neatly lined the ceiling high bookshelves. Between the books and other objects stood a picture of a woman with a wide, innocent smile and a shy little girl. The ceiling was almost hidden from view by the ceiling was almost hidden from view by the hanging skeletal samples of whales and other creatures. Somehow, the room appeared the way Sam had always pictured a room belonging to Hartman would appear. The look of the man himself still fiddling with his device fit Sam's image to a T too. The windows displayed on the monitor that monopolized one entire wall were closed one by one until the monitor itself faded out. Then a large picture window appeared. The entire wall was a window. Hartman beckoned Sam, who was squinting in the bright light. Outside the window, Sam could see the heart-shaped lake. That's my heart right there. I don't know why I'm doing this accent, so I'm sorry if this bothers you in any way. That's my heart right there, Hartman said, pointing outside. That crater was made by a void out. I see myself in that crater, my wife and my child. Sam was even more confused. Was that supposed to be some kind of metaphor? It's like looking at the shape of my heart. Hartman continued as the AED in Hartman's chest projected a hologram into the air. A 3D image of an animated heart was pulsating rhythmically. The doctors called it myocardial cordiformia. Mine is an especially unusual case. Doesn't run in the family. Hartman gestured toward the sofa and encouraged Sam to sit down. Hartman sat back down in his lounge chair. You know, I never came to terms with their loss. In the days that followed, I became obsessed with an idea that the beach is real and they are on it. I'm trying to stop the accent, I'm sorry. Some of my colleagues ridiculed me for it. They said that it was just a theory or the dogma of some group who shared a particular paradigm, but I knew it was real. I would induce cardiac arrest, 3 minutes a day, 3 minutes at a time, and search for them, day after day after day. That meant that the two people in the photo on Hartman's bookshelf were his wife and child. Here was a man who Sam could somewhat relate. Also, you can say goodbye, Sam asked. Quite the opposite. It is said that everyone's beach is different. So what if everyone's afterlife is different too? I find the thought terrifying. Spending eternity alone, which is why I decided to find my family and make sure to move on with them. You mean die with them? Hartman smiled at Sam's question and raised his thumb. If death would see us reunited, then yes. But the repeated cardiac arrests took their toll on my heart. I'm trying to stop. The muscle gradually deformed, and after a while, they started calling me the beach scientist, Hartman. Hartman got up from his chair and held out his hand. So, I'm Hartman. Nice to meet you. Sam's expression remained blank as Hartman approached the stretcher. Mama's face slowly appeared as he pulled down the zipper. There was no paleness to her face, nor any hint of post-mortem lividity or rigor mortis. It looked like she was sleeping peacefully. Hartman let out a curious sigh. A body that doesn't necrotize, nor signs of decomposition. It's as if she were still alive, Hartman commented. Sam recognized that look. It was the same look that dead man had given him when they had first met, the look of a scientist filled with pure curiosity. She's the perfect mummy, an impeccable corpse, Hartman continued, fiddling with the body. Behind his curiosity, there didn't lie some great moral motivation to help mankind, but the instant urge of a child to disassemble a toy to see how it worked. Sam had to say something. He didn't like the way Hartman was tinkering with Mama's body so brazenly. It wasn't about respect for the dead. He just didn't want to see Mama's body violated like that when Mama's Ka still lived on inside Lochna. Luckily, Hartman seemed to sense Sam's disapproval and looked up. Where's the other thing you were supposed to bring? Ah, found it. Behold. Hartman showed Sam a small case that he had removed from the depths of the bag. From it, Hartman took out a transparent cylindrical container that Sam had never seen before. It seemed to be made of reinforced plastic and filled with some kind of liquid. Inside floated something that looked like a string. Were Bridges up to something again? Sam remembered how Deadman and Die Hardman had made him carry Lou all the way to the incinerator without telling him anything. Once again, he had found himself lugging cargo he was kept oblivious to. Back then, it had been with Bridget's corpse, and this time it was with Mama's. He was furious at Bridget. He was furious at Bridges for once again using him as an unintentional errand boy. Sam's anger must have been showing on his face, because Hartman wiggled his index finger at him to placate him and indicated toward the container. It appears to be an umbilical cord, yes? Sam didn't even bother responding. He supposed that it did, but it also looked like the remains of some kind of weird creature, one that lived on the planet with an entirely different kind of ecosystem. Human, by the looks of it, I think, Hartman remarked, showing Sam his cufflink and throwing him a meaningful look. Hartman was telling him to play along. Sam didn't know what Hartman was up to, but he could understood that much. The situation seemed awfully similar to when Deadman had raised his suspicions about the director. It doesn't look biological. I can't say for sure without looking into it further, but I don't think this was an ordinary conduit between fetus and placenta. It looks more like a BT's tether. Hartman showed Sam the container up close. Once he got a good look at it, Sam could see a substance like fine particles writhing around upon its surface. He had no idea that BT tethers that materialized like this could be harvested. And this was Mama's. Hartman wondered aloud to himself. Sam had been the one to sever it, but he had no recollection of picking it back up. Hartman gave another meaningful nod. Yes, a body that doesn't necrotize, and an umbilical cord connected to the beach. These are remarkable discoveries, Sam, Hartman commented excitedly. Sam began to back away, hoping to escape the hug that Hartman looked like he might give him at any moment. Hartman gave Sam an apologetic look and placed the container with the umbilical cord in it. I have to retrace this back. Hartman gave Sam an apologetic look and placed the container with the umbilical cord in it back on the stretcher before closing the body bag back up. Would you mind looking at this for a moment? Hartman asked, turning to the monitor on the wall. It showed a four-legged creature lying in a snow-covered field, a mammoth. Sam wondered if it had been dug up around here and continued to gaze at the monitor, unsure of Hartman's intentions. Look closely. Can you tell what it is? Hartman asked. He zoomed in on the mammoth's abdomen. The camera was picking up something strange. An umbilical cord was extending out from its belly. Do you see it? An umbilical cord is extending out of this mammoth's body. This record, made before the Death Stranding, happened to get left behind. And look here. Hartman switched to the next photo. This one showed an ammonite with a similar cord. It was dangling from the center of the ammonite's spiral-shaped shell. So far, I've only managed to dig up these two photographs, but I have been able to establish that neither of them are fakes. Now, the umbilical cord issue might be one thing, but what's stranger is that neither this mammoth nor this ammonite were found fossilized or preserved in ice, as you might expect. Both of these species have been extinct for thousands of years, But, as you can see in the photographs, they look as though they only died yesterday. Just like Mama. And I'll bet that even more of these specimens are out there waiting to be found. My colleagues are on the hunt as we speak. Once you activate the chiral network, I might even be able to retrieve some of the past records too. To Sam, it all seemed a bit out there. Still, he couldn't tear his eyes away from the monitor. Had that cord dangling from the ammonite really connected it to the beach? And what else did that imply? 5 minutes to cardiac arrest. The AED's voice rang out across the room. Hartman shut down the monitor and the view outside the window reappeared. The heart-shaped lake was right outside. If that lake, which had been gouged into the earth by a void-out, was the same as Hartman's heart, that made his heart itself a scar. The fact that he had chosen to settle near it and look down on it every single day as he went about his unusual routine told Sam that this man was living in the past as well. Mama and Deadman were the same. They may have adopted the name of bridges, but they were attempting to build bridges toward the past. Each person has their own beach, just as an umbilical cord attaches one fetus to one mother. We are attached to one beach. That's the rule, but I'm the exception. My beach is connected to others, as if it were the beneficiary of a coronary bypass. Maybe this twisted heart of mine made it possible. I just want to find them. I'll be back soon, hopefully, from where my family are, Hartman said to Sam as he reclined in his chair. You probably think what I do is strange, that no matter how special my beach is, that doesn't mean that my wife and daughter are still there waiting on it. And you're right. There's still so much that we don't even understand about this world. So how can we possibly expect to understand anything about the beach? But I have a theory. When a ka departs its ha, it goes to the beach, which forms a corridor between this life and the next. Under normal circumstances, a body is incinerated within 48 hours of its passing, and before it can necrotize, so that the ka can pass over to the other side, knowing that it has no ha to return to. Its attachment to this world disappears. Well, once a body so necrotizes, the ka becomes bound to this world. But because it doesn't actually have a body to come back to, it becomes a BT. In any case, the ka doesn't spend a long time on the beach, but there are exceptions. For example, those who didn't die a natural death, those whose bodies were wiped out in an instant without necrotizing or being incinerated, don't become BTs, but their attachment toward this world keeps their ka from leaving the beach. You can laugh it away as the delusions of a madman if you like, though, since no matter how many times I wander the beach, I never find my wife and daughter. 4 minutes to cardiac arrest. The AED announced how long Hartman had left. My body will never go back to the way it was now. I'm willing to bet on that. But it all has to have some kind of meaning. The battlefields, the endless wars you found yourself trapped in, they're from a time that actually existed, from a world war that took place over 100 years ago. That war was a particularly nonsensical one which weapons of mass destruction slaughtered people on a vast scale. The inherent meaning of each individual death was snatched away from those victims, and they became nothing more than a number. They had no idea why they died. It's the same for those who die in a void-out. If that strong attachment to this world and the yearning to stay connected to it created that battlefield, then that might support my theory about void-out victims becoming trapped on the beach. 3 minutes until cardiac arrest. Deadman told me that Clifford Unger was in the U.S. Special Forces, Hartman went on. He must have seen a lot of war in his time. His misery and hatred, combined with your BB acting as some sort of catalyst, may have brought these battlefields to our world. It's just a theory, but perhaps that man who can summon BTs also summoned Cliff's anger. You think Higgs is pulling his strings? Sam asked. Sam found himself unconsciously gripping Cliff's dog tag in his pocket. What if Higgs summoned Cliff in that battlefield to get in Sam's way now that he could repel the BTs? 2 minutes to cardiac arrest. I don't know. But evidence does suggest that Higgs brought them here, Hartman mused. The window on the wall went into shade mode, and the light outside disappeared. The interior of the room slowly grew darker. Oh, before I forget, I have a favor to ask, Hartman quickly interjected. 1 minute remaining. Please hold onto something secure. Could you just relax until I come back? Time stops the beach, but not in the seam. Rest assured, it'll only feel like 3 minutes to you, Hartman explained. Hartman closed his eyes and the gramophone, placed at an angle to his lounge chair, began to play music. It was Chopin's funeral march again. We'll continue this shortly. The AED emitted the beep, and the EKG flatlined. As the funeral march echoed quietly throughout the lab, Sam had no idea what to do. It was just him, Mama's corpse, Hartman's temporarily deceased body, and the gently snoozing BB. There wasn't a single person who was truly alive or dead in the entire room, although it was unclear what really defined who was alive and who was dead in the first place. All Sam could do was settle himself on the sofa and wait for Hartman to come back. He was still holding onto Cliff's dog tag. It was covered in scratches and listed his name, affiliation, and religion, but no matter how long Sam stared at it, he still didn't understand anything about Cliff. He didn't understand Cliff's relationship with Lou, nor anything about the man's life or death. If Higgs was harnessing Cliff's anger and summoning the battlefield to get in the way of Sam's mission, it seemed like a very roundabout method. There must have been other things that he could have done that would take less time and effort. For someone who talked so big about bringing humanity's extinction, why didn't Higgs just use a nuke or voidouts or something to destroy all the cities and take out the chiral network's knots? No matter how effective a repatriate's blood and other bodily fluids were against BTs, they were still just byproducts of one body. It wasn't like there was enough of Sam's blood to get rid of every single BT. They still posed a massive threat. Higgs had once been a respectable porter. Fragile's comments and Bridges' data backed that up. In fact, when he first started working with Fragile, the main motive had been to help other people. But that had all changed when he jumped ship and began working with someone else. That meant this new partner must hold the key to everything. But neither Bridges nor Fragile knew who it was. Higgs had made good use of Fragile's dooms in organization, so his partner must have offered him something even more powerful. Maybe Higgs' true intentions lay beyond extinction. His proud proclamations about how he was the particle of God and the arrogance that went with that claim seemed to imply as much. Administering shock. Stand clear. Sam suddenly snapped back to his senses. The funeral march music was gradually winding down. No luck. Hartman sat up and wiped away his tears. He quickly tapped the hourglass on the table next to him, and the still sand suddenly began to flow upwards. Sam reflected on how this strange backward hourglass represented Hartman's heart, which desired nothing more than to rewind the past. Oh, sorry. Where were we? No, it may seem like a nuisance, but I'm acclimated to it now. Most of life's basic functions fit rather easily into a 21-minute time slot. Sleep is the tricky one, Hartman commented lightheartedly. I die for 3 minutes and live for 21. The cycle of my life is much like yours, except for the fact that yours is split into 24-hour periods, while mine is split into 24 minutes. But when I'm dead on the beach, time seems to go on forever. Because time doesn't exist on the beach. It's like how time passes when you're asleep, But this cycle is my reality. Considering the BTs that return from the past, and the timefall that accelerates the degradation of everything it touches, how can our sense of time cope with such irrational phenomena? How do you think we got here? I believe that it was because of our awareness of time. We can imagine a future beyond ourselves. We know that even the Neanderthals buried their dead and laid flowers. We humans can see a tomorrow. We conceived concepts like eternity and an afterlife, helping our societies to outlast us as individuals. And in order for societies to outlast the lifespan of the individual, we conceived of an afterlife and a future beyond ourselves. Alas, the Death Stranding threatens to undo all our progress. Take me, for example. I want to find my family on the beach and pass together with them into the world of the dead. This phenomenon has managed to produce a man as strange as me. Honestly, the 21 minutes I spend here, all downtime, nothing more. Time spent waiting to go back to the search. My body may be present, but my soul is on the beach. I'm already dead. Some thought that it was most likely a piece of fiction that Hartman had concocted for himself. It was to explain his truth and share it with others. If someone only talked about their own story to themselves, they'd go nuts. They'd withdraw into themselves, becoming the king of a kingdom they were the only inhabitant of. That's why we all need someone to share our story with. That's what's making a connection. That's what making a connection is. Maybe Hartman, Mama, and Lochner, and Deadman, too, are all struggling to try and create a place for themselves in this world. Maybe Bridget's plan to rebuild America was nothing more than a narrative either. Immediately after the thought struck him, the cufflink on Sam's right wrist began to feel much heavier. He ended up blurting out anything to escape its weight. I know that feeling. Lost my family in an accident, he said, not really knowing what family he meant. In all honesty, not really knowing what family he meant, in all honesty. Was he talking about Lucy, Bridget, and Amelia? Or about the photograph he had lost? Perhaps he was even talking about the parents he had never even met. Well, I never expected you to open up to me, Hartman commented, inverting the hourglass. Through some sort of sorcery, the flow of the sand turned and began to fall from the upper compartment to the lower one. The amount of sand sat in the top never lessened, yet it still piled up below. I'm the same as you. Okay, water break. That said, I do want to see. I'm just seeing if there's like a good stopping point. Because usually when there's a location change, it's where I'd like to stop. But okay, there is another location change. So I will continue reading. Mountain Knot City outskirts, Satellite City. Don't worry, it's all right. Trust me, a voice told Hartman. Even if he closed his eyelids, the light raining down still managed to hurt his eyes. He was wearing a mask and vaguely aware that the anesthesia would make him drop off any moment now. The doctors had told him that the surgery would take the better parts of a day, but when he next opened his eyes, it would all already be over. 10 hours would pass in the blink of an eye. He experienced the exact same phenomenon whenever his consciousness switched to its beach phase. But when he spoke of this phase to others, they always likened it to a near-death experience. The structure of his stories and the motifs within were shared by many people. They always described looking down at themselves from above, that they heard their name called when they attempted to cross a river, only to find themselves alive again when they turned back. That they were going to meet the friends and family that had passed on before them, or that they were passing through a tunnel with a light at the end. The records Hartman saw always mentioned the same details over and over again. Then, after the Death Stranding, all of that was replaced with talk of the beach. A beach and the ocean. All near-death experiences became the same. Around the same time that the dead started to return from the beach, some people began to be born with abilities to sense the world of the dead. And some people emerged with the transcendental ability to use the beach to move through physical space. There were even those who were forced back to this world when they died, who, in effect, were immortal. They were called repatriates. A theory was even floated that suggested using the beach to create a pathway for a network. The beach evolved into a physical concept. It may not have existed in this dimension, but it existed in a state that could be utilized in the physical world. "You'll be drifting off soon, just a little longer." The surgeon's voice already sounded very far away. Then Hartman was floating above his body, looking at it lying there with its chest clamped open. What was going on? Was he having a near-death experience? The EKG wasn't showing anything out of the ordinary. His other vital signs all read normal. Was he dreaming? Even though he had been anesthetized. I'm sorry, I suddenly can't say that words. Even though he had been anesthetized, the doctors continued to move calmly and efficiently. They looked like engineers fixing a soft biological machine. It had been a few years since the problem with his heart was first detected, since he found out that his heart had been stopping in his sleep. He had no idea. He was asleep. His wife suspected it was sleep apnea, but Hartman didn't really care. It wasn't like he was going to die, and besides, he didn't have time to be going and seeing doctors back then. He put aside his wife's concerns and threw himself into his work. He had been scouted by Bridges, and he was busy grappling with all his data on mass extinctions. It was around that time when he began to have the same dream over and over again. He knew what they were. They were dreams of extinction. Everyone with dooms had them. At the time, he had no idea that he had that condition. He knew he was a genius, but not this. He didn't even believe in the beach. He had assumed Bridges was simply after his intelligence, but it seemed they had detected his dooms too. Bridget even told him as much herself. After the Death Stranding, people were rushing to figure out what had happened. It was completely unprecedented. They didn't even have a name for it. Eventually, the annihilation events came to be known as voidouts. The monsters that came from the other side were named BTs, and they came from the world of the dead via the beach. The phenomenon itself was named the Death Stranding. Naming all these elements was the first step toward objective study and discussion. The first Death Stranding wasn't a void-out between the living and the dead, but a void-out between colliding matter and antimatter. Eventually, the theory mutated. It was us. Our dead became the BTs. It was the BTs that were responsible for the void-out. But why was it only humans that became BTs? Because the only ones who could perceive death and an afterlife were human beings. It was our astounding human consciousness that had detected the beach and summoned the BTs forth. The tragedy of extinction was switched into the glory of being the chosen ones. It was elitism on a global scale. Only the ones who could overcome such a tragedy could go forth to the promised land. It was pure arrogance. That's why Hartman hadn't believed in the beach. Mankind was still intent on continuing to climb the stairs of evolution, when in fact, we had already reached the landing long ago. New existences were already beginning to catch up with us from the other side, and the BTs were one of them. Then we would just have to step down from that pedestal. Hartman hadn't accepted Bridges' invitation in order to save mankind or rebuild America. He just wanted to prove his theory. He had immersed himself in data about mass extinctions to prove the universal truth of extinction. The whole reason that he joined Bridges was to discover the few records of extinction that still remained. He had come here together with his wife, who was also a member of Bridges, and his infant daughter. They were the only ones who had joined the expedition as a family. They were lavished with attention and admiration as a symbol of connections. But Hartman's dreams of extinction and his heart's defect became more and more severe. Hartman knew that the reason he had these dreams of extinction was because of his heart defect. They were just nightmares that reflected how unwell he was. That's why he underwent the surgery, to prove he was right. There weren't any operating theaters in the colony he was based at for his research, so he was transferred to the ICU in Mountain Knot City. The surgery itself went well. For a few days after the surgery, he would have to rely on an artificial heart. But that was all part of the plan. His wife and daughter were relieved and asked if he would be home soon. He said yes. Hartman and his family lived in a satellite city outside of Mountain Knot City, a place where a void-out-based terror attack would later snuff out the lives of his wife and daughter after they returned home. Hartman understood what had happened in his core. It didn't matter whether people believed it or not. He had been asleep right up until the explosion. Then, as if it was still in a dream, 2 flashes of light burst before his eyes, one after the other. They were so intense that he couldn't perceive any other color in the world. He could feel the hospital room vibrating and the thunderous rumble of its foundations shaking. When color did eventually return, the hospital room lights were still out. It must have been a blackout. Hartman was all alone in his room, and there didn't seem to be a soul out in the hall. Either. Hartman tried to call for help, but nothing came out. His chest was tight. He couldn't breathe. All he could feel was a sharp pain, like a knife had been plunged into his heart. He tried frantically pressing the emergency button, but it was no use because the system was down. The artificial heart had stopped working. And once he found himself floating, looking down at his body close to death in the dark. The artificial heart had stopped working. And once more he had found himself floating, looking down at a body close to death in the dark. When he tried to sit up, he found himself on the beach. It was a sandy beach. The waves were lapping at the shore, but it was also strewn with the stranded carcasses of whales, dolphins, and other sea-dwelling creatures that Hartman didn't recognize. It was just how the people who had near-death experiences described. It seemed so incredibly realistic. He couldn't believe that he could dream something so vividly. His stomach lurched. If he could see the beach this vividly, then it couldn't be some subjective concept in his imagination. It must actually exist. But to accept that fact, Hartman would have to let go of everything he had always believed in. He suddenly noticed several lines of footsteps leading toward the sea. He still tried to write them off as manifestations of his own imagination. That was also why he saw people walking in the very same direction when he gazed in the direction in which the footsteps led. It had been his own head that produced these figures. They were the cause of the people who had died in the void out. He didn't know any of them. He just saw hundreds of backs silently heading away from him toward the ocean. If he had known them, they would have been more than blank behinds. They would have been the backs of someone with a name. Hartman stood up and looked across the crowd of people. Someone was stumbling toward the sea to the side of him. She was a small old lady. Hartman had never seen her before. He didn't know her name, nor did he know her face. The woman looked up at him. Her eyes were unfocused, and Hartman doubted whether she could even see him at all. She simply stood there before raising a finger to her lips, as if to shush him. Without acknowledging the confused Hartman himself, she prodded the AED on his chest. The pain went through him like an electric shock. That's when he saw them, his wife and daughter, and it dawned on him that they too had fallen victim to the void out. Hartman tried to shout out, but the pain in his chest wouldn't let him. Their backs were becoming more and more distant, like they were being washed away by a sea of people. When Hartman stretched out his arm, another jolt of pain shot through him. When he realized that the pain wasn't in his head and was proof that he was still alive, Hartman began to despair. "Wait! Don't leave without me!" He could finally speak, but they didn't hear. Another pain shot through Hartman's chest. The intervals between the shocks were getting shorter and shorter and becoming more systematic. His heart was starting again. His body back in that hospital room was trying to call him home. He couldn't shout anymore and his legs wouldn't move. He wanted nothing more than to chase after his wife and daughter, but he couldn't get any closer to the sea. None of these strangers were having a problem reaching the sea, so why did it feel like he was the only one stuck in the sand and unable to move? He didn't belong here. His place was still elsewhere. Hartman would never forget the voice of the doctor proclaiming he had saved him. That same voice might as well have proclaimed that he would never see his family again. It had been 21 minutes before the ward's backup generator finally kicked in. The artificial heart had started working again, and an AED had been used to shock it back to life. It was because of that heart that he had been ripped away from his family. Hartman had nowhere to direct his sadness, so instead he turned to anger because, at the very least, he had a target to be angry at. It wasn't even toward the terrorist attack that had caused the void out in the first place. He was angry at his heart that had ripped his family apart, and the beach itself. Everything had changed. Once he knew that the beach existed, he decided to focus all his anger to understanding how it worked. That anger transformed his heart. He became able to share the beach with others. That's when the cycle of 21 minutes of life and 3 minutes of death began. Hartman went to the beach each time and searched for traces of his wife and daughter. Then, when he came back to this world, he continued to research into the beach. He had managed to make a few discoveries. For one, he realized that when he was having dreams of extinction, his ka was already on the beach. He had simply perceived it as a dream before, because he had been unable to accept the very existence of the beach. He came to believe that he had dreamed of the big 5 extinction events and lived these past extinctions vicariously in his nightmares. And that the accident in the hospital room hadn't been his first trip to the beach. When he looked back in time, he calculated that he had been there an unfathomable number of times. His combined research into extinction and the beach became his guiding light, and once he knew everything there was to know, he would finally be able to reunite with his family. 5 minutes to cardiac arrest. The AED interrupted Hartman's long monologue as he shared his past with Sam. Hartman sighed and wiped the tears from his eyes. Sam knew that this time they weren't just some reaction to chiral matter. If Hartman wasn't going to give up on finding his family, maybe Sam shouldn't have given up on searching for Lucy. But he knew that he didn't have the tenacity of Hartman. Is that truly how you feel? If Sam hadn't given up on Lucy and Lou, then maybe he could have asked for Amelia's help in searching the beach for them or something. But Sam had missed his chance and ran from bridges. You didn't even think of that? It was inevitable that they would chase him once he started running. By the way, in case you're wondering what some of these interjections, there's like a few points, I don't know if you can see it, were like in parentheses, italicized, and I don't know who's talking or whose voice it should be, so I'm just running with it, but I'm going to assume it's Amelia, because that's one voice that goes through Sam's head in previous episodes, so there's that. There's something I want to ask of you, Hartman said, fiddling with his cufflink. The huge display on the wall showed a map. It showed the location of a number of shelters that spread out like spider webs from Mountain Knot City in Hartman's lab by the heart-shaped lake. One of the shelters belonged to the geologist who Sam had battled through the blizzard to visit. He remembered how the man had told him that he'd discovered a fossil from the beach. Everything looked fine and dandy until his focus fell on a black belt of terrain that lay to the east of Edgnot City. It ran north to south, almost like it was partitioning the areas that had already been connected to the chiral network from Edgnot. This is the only area known to contain fossils from the late Cretaceous period, when the dinosaurs died out. The assumption being that the last one lived here, and here alone. You see, hiding in the earth, there, then, are memories of a major mass extinction. The fossil beach that the geologist found appears to be authentic as well. Now that his shelter is connected to here by way of the chiral network, we've been able to share some more detailed data. HQ has even been able to restore data from the past, and the data of mine that was wiped out in the terrorist attack. Sam thought he could see Hartman's face brighten. It didn't seem as heavy as when he was talking about his wife and daughter. His usual curious expression was back, too. 4 minutes to cardiac arrest. Hartman muttered at the AED to shut up and began to fiddle with it. The numbers counting down in the small window disappeared. Sam must have looked alarmed, because Hartman shot him a thumbs up of reassurance. Lots of us Bridges members used to be holed up in the shelters, excavating and researching the past, but thanks to the void-out terrorism and all the local destruction, that number has dropped significantly. Luckily, we've been making a lot of noteworthy discoveries out here lately, but in an ironic turn, the more we discover, the more the tar seems to be eroding everything away. Hartman pointed to the black belt on the map. We call it tar because it's the easiest thing to call it, but it differs from tar both in structure and in its properties. Sam had seen it up close and personal when he had thrown the nuke into the lake. He couldn't forget how the tar absorbed the enormous energy of that blast. We set up some research shelters there before the tar started bubbling up, and even built a distribution center out there. Some relay equipment from the chiral network, too. The map displayed what Hartman described in chronological order. On the map, the tiny black specks on the map that had been small only 1 year prior suddenly expanded into an extensive belt shape. It showed that when Amelia and the rest of Bridges 1 had first arrived, it could probably still have been circumvented. It was just after she arrived in Edgnot City when the tar began to well up and the scale of the erosion expanded. Something about it felt intentional. In fact, the timing probably matched up when Amelia was first captured. The only person Sam could think of who could pull off such a stunt was Higgs. Then how the hell am I supposed to hook the West up to the network? Sam asked. It seemed like Hartman had been anticipating Sam's question, as he gave yet another thumbs up. I'm asking you for your help in building a newer one. It won't be much, given the handful of equipment we've managed to scrape together. Nothing like the knot cities, that's for sure. But a knot is still a knot. Sam, I want you to go to the I want you to use the Cupid to put the scientists on the network, then go to Amelia. Afterward, we can get back to the important job of researching the death. Hartman collapsed like the strings on the mannequin had been cut, and his body crumpled to the floor. Sam attempted to spring to Hartman's aid, but the floor reacted first. It expanded to absorb the shock of Hartman's fall and cushioned his landing. The AED on Hartman's chest began to count down until resuscitation. Exasperated by the fact that he would have to wait another 3 minutes, Sam went to sit himself down on the sofa. But before he made it, Sam's cufflink began to vibrate, indicating an incoming call. It was from Die Hardman, only this time Sam couldn't see him. Sam's cufflink had been set to sound only. Sam didn't remember doing that. Then he remembered the look Hartman had given him when he took out the umbilical cord. When Sam checked the cufflink, he could see that the communications were going through the lab's firewall. That meant that Hartman didn't want Die Hardman to see the cord. That could also explain why Sam had been made to bring it here in secret. Sam, you heard him. You can grab the order at the delivery terminal. We want you to activate the shelters where the bridge's staff are stationed. Then we can get to work on replacing the lost way station near the tar belt. Then you can head for Edge Knot. By connecting the shelters, we should be able to restore our research results and any past data that has been has been lost. That in itself is going to provide a huge boost to helping us understand the Death Stranding better. Oh, sorry, this is Die Hardman talking. I'm going to have to take it back after I really need to drink water. I'm assuming this is Die Hardman talking. Sam, you heard him. You can grab the order at the delivery terminal. We want you to activate the shelters where the bridge's staff are stationed. Then we can get to work on replacing the lost way station near the tar belt. Then you can head for Edge Knot. By connecting the shelters, we should be able to restore our research results and any past data that has been lost. That in itself is going to provide a huge boost to helping us understand Death Stranding better. It'll also bring us one step closer to saving Amelia and rebuilding the UCA. Lugging the equipment for the replacement way station is going to be heavy work, though. I know that it's a tough job, but you're all we've got. On the Higgs front, he hasn't pulled anything conspicuous for a while now, but I doubt that means he's just sat there doing nothing. Take care. Perhaps it was because Sam knew Hartman was hiding something from Die Hardman, and because of what Deadman had told him during their own secret discussion. What? Okay, sorry. Perhaps it was because Sam knew Hartman was hiding something from Die Hardman, and because of what Deadman had told Sam during their own secret discussion. But the director's tone felt colder to Sam than before. Sorry, that sentence is the entire section is really awkward. It was a little late to consider now, but it seemed like Bridges had changed a lot since the Bridges he knew 10 years ago. Deadman, Mama, and Hartman had all joined after Sam had left. And now that Bridget was dead, there weren't that many members left who even knew America as it once was. Die Hardman was probably the only member remaining who was there when Bridges was first established. Sam had been born some years later, so even he wasn't sure how it first formed. Bridges wasn't one thick rope, but rather numerous fine threads bundling together, each with their own motivations. Sam was one of those strands, too. Sam descended the outer stairs of the snow-covered lab and turned around. He didn't like leaving Hartman like that. It may have been routine for him, but to Sam, he was leaving behind a corpse that had gone into cardiac arrest. What if the AED didn't restart his heart properly? Wasn't his body necrotized? Sam began to worry. But Sam had his own routine to get back to now. Sam had to carry on doing his duty without letting on about his misgivings towards Bridges and Die Hardman. As he began to climb a mountain, Sam activated the active skeleton that he had equipped in Hartman's lab. It was a piece of equipment that attached itself to both of Sam's legs and improved his walking and stability. He felt so light. Once he had climbed the slope a little, the heart-shaped lake came into view. Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to get an idea of how much of the chapter. I'm not actually at the location switch, but then there is a nice little break here. And we're almost at the hour mark, so which is why I am double checking if I can find the. Excuse me, I'm just. Okay, no, I can still read on. Just checking. Just gotta make sure. I have to drink water. Every time he took a step into the snow, the strap of his backpack dug painfully into his shoulder. Even though he was wading through sub-zero temperatures, he had to wipe the sweat from his face more than once. A whole day had passed since Sam had left Hartman's lab. It was only one more peak, and the rest of the journey would be smooth sailing. His legs may have had the help of the active skeleton, but it didn't do so much for his back. The weight of the cargo on it was making him want to admit defeat, but it was just a little farther. Once he had connected this area to the chiral network and made it to Edge City, he'd be able to put this pack down once and for all. Then the UCA would be rebuilt, he could save Amelia, and he could free Lou. He would finally be able to confront his past self who had failed to save Lucy Liu and make peace with it. What's more, once the whole chiral network was up and running, Hartman could make even more discoveries about the beach and extinction. And once they fully understood the beach, then maybe, just maybe, Sam would be able to set Lou free from the beach and himself free from the scene. If he could untangle life and death in this world, then they'd finally be free. Excuse me, I'm double checking something. Sam caressed the pod, but Lou showed no reaction whatsoever. More than 10 days had passed since Dead Man had tinkered with the pod, and they still weren't communicating as they had before. Lou spent most of the day asleep, but maybe that was to be expected. They hadn't approached any BT-occupied territory or experienced any spikes in chiral density lately. Babies were supposed to sleep a lot anyway. Besides, if regular babies needed so much sleep, then what about babies that hadn't even been born yet? It would have been selfish to wake Lou for no reason. Wait, wasn't he intending to reforge their relationship from the beginning after Lou's memories had been wiped? Calling this kid Lou was so self-centered of him. This kid could have been called by a different name when it was in its mother's womb. All Sam had done was project his past onto this poor baby. He was basically repeating what Bridget had done to him when she left America in his hands. He recalled her voice inside his head. "You're the one I wanted to send, Sam." "No, America's finished. Bridget, you're the president of jack shit." Sam thought back to the hospital room that had been transformed with holograms to turn it into a fake Oval Office. It felt like the weight of Bridget after she fell on him back then. It felt like the weight of Bridget after she fell on him back then had been added onto his back. The children always carry the baggage that their parents leave behind. Whether it's debt or fortune, the parents force them to bear it whether they like it or not. Parents like to preach that this was the baton of life and the succession of history. Their kids were even forced to grieve their deaths and usher their souls onward. Was that why you carried Bridget's corpse? But what were parents who outlived their children supposed to do? A strong wind struck Sam straight on. It roared like an animal and blew past him. The snows thickened, and all Sam could see was white. He got down on his knees to give his legs a rest and readjust his cargo. A pain shot through him, and he let out a grunt. The wound he had sustained from a stray bullet on that battlefield still hadn't healed. Sam heard a muffled cry from the pod. It seemed that Lou had reacted to Sam's pain. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe he had arbitrarily determined that to be the case. Maybe he was being arrogant. It didn't matter. What did matter was that Sam felt the connection between him and Lou repairing itself. He stroked the pod. Then he let out a sigh and got back up. The wind had only blown strongly for a moment, but the snow was still feeding and his surroundings had grown silent again. Everything was back to normal except for one thing. Something flashed in front of him. Sam fell to his injured knee again, and then onto his ass. He pulled off the straps of his pack and set it on the ground. Then he removed the Odra deck, thrust it into the snow, and switched it on. Sam's cargo was immediately blanketed in white and now resembled one of the many boulders strewn across the landscape. It was all thanks to his hologram projector. It was one of the few new functions included in the upgrade the equipment underwent in Mountain Knot City. Sam hid in its shadows. Unless he was mistaken, the light had bounced off something man-made. Then the light flashed once again, adding weight to his theory. Now it was moving. Maybe it was some mules. The hologram should have blinded them to his presence, as well as invalidated any sensors. As long as he remained quiet, there was no threat. But maybe Sam had been too optimistic, because the group had now plainly changed course and were heading this way. Lou's fists were clenched tight in sympathy with Sam's nervousness. Sam could make out 5 people so far, each of them spreading out in a different direction. It seemed to Sam that they were trying to surround him, and they were slowly but surely closing in. They were clad from head to toe in what looked like thick gray cloaks. Each one had a gun in their hand. These weren't mules. This was an armed group. If Sam had to guess, they were probably after the relay equipment he was carrying, but he had to wonder how they knew he would be delivering this equipment, and how they had guessed the route he would take. Sam kept an eye on the 5's movements as he quickly took out his bolo gun from his backpack and assembled it. If his assailants had been mules, he probably would have distracted them with some spare cargo, but it didn't look like that tactic would do him any good here. They probably wanted to destroy the equipment. He also had to consider the possibility that these 5 were just the vanguard, and that Higgs was lurking around somewhere. A battle with the BTs would be imminent. First and foremost, Sam had to protect his cargo. Putting his faith in the protection afforded by the hologram cloaking, Sam decided to try and draw the group's attention toward him. Toward his right was the slope he had just descended, and although his left was open, there were likely numerous crevices lying ahead. Sam dropped down and retreated. The group's reaction was swift. Every single one of them at once moved to Sam's left flank. They were trying to drive him toward the slope. The guns they held were most likely loaded with normal lethal bullets, but all Sam had was his bolo gun, which was intended to apprehend and immobilize and only fired binding bolo wires from both ends. It wasn't deadly in the slightest. The enemy continued to close in. Sam flattened himself against the snow-covered rock to use them as a shield. But the 5 enemies circled even closer. An uncomfortable feeling that like his organs were being squeezed hard suddenly came over Sam. It was like someone had plunged their hand inside his abdomen and was churning his guts around inside. Sam felt like he was going to vomit. Lou was frightened. There was no crying, but Lou curled up as stiff as a dead body, eyes squeezed tightly shut. That's when Sam realized that it wasn't his fear that was being transmitted to Lou, but the other way around. Lou's fear was gnawing away at Sam. He hadn't had the same violent reaction when he was transported to Cliff's battlefield. He hadn't even felt this way before when he was crossing BT territory. Lou's emotions were coursing into Sam like a raging river, and since Lou didn't know how to express them in words, they were doing a number on Sam's insides instead. BBs had no way to express themselves in words, which is why they needed to be connected to their host via an umbilical cord and use of the Odradek interface. It was actually because they didn't articulate the world in words that they could sense the world of the dead. Sam closed his eyes and placed his hand on the pod. Lou was unusually afraid of these particular assailants. Shattering the silence, a bullet grazed past Sam's shoulder. Now they were directly under attack. Sam peeked out from behind the rock to assess the situation. Several armed men were approaching his hiding spot to surround him. He counted 5 so far. At first glance, they looked like ordinary mules, but they were obviously out for blood. Was this what Lou was so scared of? Another gunshot rang out. This time, the bullet scraped the rock, shielding Sam. Then somebody raised their voice. Just like the mules, they spoke in a language that Sam didn't recognize, with short screams that seemed to make up a code that only their comrades could decipher. It seemed to be coming from nearby. Sam knew that it would be all over if he stayed where he was, so he readied his bolo gun and sprang out from behind the rock. Excuse me, I'm double checking something here. Okay. The shooting continued, following him closely, but the active skeleton he was wearing helped him leap away. Sam knew some hematic grenades in an attempt Sam threw some hematic grenades in an attempt to blind his attackers. He knew that showering terrorists in that precious blood of his was unlikely to do much, but the only weapons he really had at hand were supposed to be for the BTs, so they would have to do. At least if he left any corpses here, he would have the tools on hand to deal with them before they had the chance to turn. As the splatter of Sam's blood blinded his pursuers, Sam ran at full speed for the snowfield. The pain in his left knee had now completely disappeared as the active skeleton forced his legs to move whether they hurt or not. An electromagnetic shot fired into the snow. Mules used the same weaponry, so that meant these attackers must have been mules once. Having succumbed to their Porter syndrome, they had transformed into Homo gestalts and were moving according to somebody else's will. Sam threw himself into the shadow of the first boulder he found and caught his breath, but his attackers were already scanning the field and were soon moving in. Sam heard another voice. It belonged to a man equipped with different weaponry, an odor deck on his shoulder and a BB pod on his chest. He must have been the leader. If Sam could take him out, then he might be able to escape. Sam felt another cramp in his gut. Lou was terrified. Clutching the pod close with one hand, Sam stared at the apparent leader. The umbilical cord connecting the man to his pod was emitting a heat like it was a flame. This was the man who Lou was so scared of. Once it had all clicked in Sam's head, the man's odor deck immediately burst to life, spinning wildly. At the same time, Lou began to scream. The man's odor deck formed into a cross shape and pointed in Sam's direction. It was like Sam and Lou were the BTs for once. Lou was twisting and turning inside the pod and kicking at its walls. Was Lou what they were after? The BB pod on the man's chest began to emit a reddish-black light. It must have contained a BB. Did that mean that the BBs were resonating with one another? The man screamed an indescribable sound once more and burst into a sprint. The four others followed behind, plowing their way through the snow. Sam forgot about Lou for the moment and fired his bolo gun. The bindings, which were double-ended with counterweights, flew through the air and wrapped themselves around the legs of the man in front. As the man fell face first into the snow, the electric shock emitted by the bolo bindings should have knocked him out. Sam set the output of his active skeleton legs to max and made another run for it. Jumping and dashing along the way, Sam aimed for the crevice. It was like he wasn't in his own body. He had no feelings in his legs at all. What if something was broken? He couldn't stop now. The active skeleton only had a little bit of power left, so Sam needed to put as much distance between himself and the men as possible before they gave out. A belt of rocks came into view. The pinnacle-shaped boulders were around the same height as him, and they were huddled tightly together. Sam's pursuers had called off the chase for the time being. Sam could still see where they were, and they were no longer running. That being said, they were still closing in at a steady pace. They must have been homing in on Lou to detect the pair. Sam tried to take a step forward, but the active skeleton made him warning. The battery was completely depleted. As Sam released the legs, he was reminded of his own body weight and tried his hardest not to succumb to the pain in his knee. It felt like he was standing on a different planet, one with gravity several times stronger than Earth. Every step felt extraordinarily heavy compared to moments ago, and the distance he had tried so hard to put between him and Lou and their attackers was shrinking by the second. Sam dragged his heavy body, trying to convince himself with each passing inch to not panic. As he got closer to the rocks, he saw that the boulders were shaped like spirals, almost as if they had been twisted out of the ground by giants. Or maybe they were more like trees that had just looked boulder-like on the surface. In any case, it felt like he was entering a rock forest. Sam felt a presence. Huddling behind a rock, he took a rope into his hand. It didn't matter that it was supposed to be for packing cargo. If an assailant approached, he wouldn't hesitate to use it on them too. At least it would be more useful in close quarter combat than any firearm would be. Sam focused all his attention on the sound around him and awaited the enemy. His and Lou's pursuers would have a hard time spotting him here. He noticed as the approaching footsteps seemed to falter. Sam half rose from behind the rock and sprung behind one of the men. Clutching each end of the rope, Sam slipped it around the man's neck, tightening the pressure on the man's corroded artery. Unable to fight back, the man slumped into unconsciousness. It looked like Lou was still afraid, but had calmed down a little compared to before. This was still far from over, though, and Sam began to worry about the relay equipment that he had left in place. The attackers might choose to destroy the equipment over killing Sam if the latter proved too difficult. Sam needed to prepare for that possibility. Several meters away, the man with the odor deck, who Sam considered their leader, along with two other attackers, were advancing back to back. Sam jumped out from behind the rock, exposing himself to the danger, and without a moment's hesitation, the men broke their battle formation and launched into an attack. As the bullets flew toward Sam, he shot back with his bolo gun, sending bolo bindings flying through the gaps between the rocks. He didn't manage to take any of the men down, but one did get hit by the weight on the end of the bolo bindings right in the pit of his stomach. Now there were two men left in front of him. Bullets were whizzing past Sam as he threw another hematic grenade toward a boulder. He wasn't throwing it for the effect of his blood, but for the power of its blast. The boulder was tipped with a large open red flower, and it was smashed into rubble by the explosion, showering the enemies with small pebbles mixed with Sam's blood. The two men let out a bestial screams as the blood rained down on them and began shooting wildly in every direction. Sam shot his bolo gun in the shadow of the rocks, sweeping one of the men off his feet as planned. Now there was just one left. The man with the odor deck threw away his gun and charged. He had his electric spear in hand and was screaming inhuman screams. The tip of the spear gave off a white electric charge. It was aimed straight for Sam. Sam hurled himself directly at the man's chest. Their shoulders crashed into one another, and a sharp, numbing pain rushed up Sam's neck. The attacker must have felt the same pain as he dropped his spear. But the man pulled back half a step and landed a kick right in Sam's knee. The pain made Sam gasp. He lost his balance and began to fall. He reached his hand out to stop himself, but unable to reach anything, Sam simply fell onto his back. The air in his lungs had been completely knocked out, and he couldn't even groan in pain. The man kicked Sam in the side and sat on top of him. He squeezed down on Sam's neck with one hand and grabbed a knife with the other. Sam couldn't move a muscle, and Lou began to shriek again. The other man's BB pod was right in front of Sam's face. The man was stronger than Sam had imagined. The man's knees were like vices digging into Sam's armpits. Sam's ribs were making whirring noises. It felt like they were going to buckle any second. The man continued to strengthen his grip around Sam's neck until Sam could no longer breathe. He could feel the world becoming distant. He knew that if he couldn't break free, then he would go into cardiopulmonary arrest, or at the very least, his tibia was going to shatter. Lou continued to scream. Sam snaked an arm around the man's back and managed to free one side of his cuff. With his left hand, he tried to grab the wrist at his neck, but the man's arm didn't move a single inch. In fact, incensed by Sam's resistance, the man's grip seemed to tighten even more. Sam could feel himself beginning to pass out. He mustered the last of his strength and in one last-ditch effort plunged the cutter from his cuff into the man's back. The grip around Sam's neck loosened right away. Sam continued to slash at the man's back. The man slumped forward. The stab shouldn't have been fatal. Sam pushed the man's body off himself and stood up. Then he simply tapped lightly on the pod and began to walk down toward the shelter, where the evil devo biologist was waiting for him. Okay. And that is where I'm going to end the chapter here. There's still more of it left, so that was part 1. And we will continue on next Friday, unless something were to happen, with part 2. Either way, I don't know if like the traffic outside you can hear from the microphone on this, but hopefully you can't, or it's just very quiet. Either way, thank you for liking if you liked. Thank you for commenting if you commented. Thank you for subscribing if you subscribed, and thank you for simply clicking on this video. Until next time, guys, see ya!